I never thought I'd be posting here, but I'm at my wit's end and could use some advice. I'm Jake, 35M, and I've been married to Sarah, 33F, for 8 years. We have 2 kids, and I thought we had a pretty solid relationship. That is, until I found out she's been cheating on me with my dad, Tom, 58M. I know, it sounds like something out of a trashy soap opera, right? But this is my life now, and I'm struggling to make sense of it all. Sarah and I met in college, got married young, and settled into what I thought was a happy life together. My dad has always been a part of our lives, coming over for Sunday dinners and helping with the kids. He's the stereotypical cool dad, into sports, dresses sharp, and has always been popular with the ladies. I never thought he'd go after my wife, though. And my mom, Linda, 56F? She's been married to my dad for 37 years. This whole situation is tearing our family apart. Looking back, I can see the signs now. Sarah started dressing up more when we'd visit my parents, always laughing a little too hard at my dad's jokes. She'd volunteer to help him with projects around their house, leaving me with the kids. I brushed it off as her being a good daughter-in-law, but man, was I naive. Things really started to feel off about 3 months ago. Sarah became distant, always on her phone, and our sex life took a nosedive. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd get defensive and accuse me of being paranoid. "You're imagining things, Jake," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "I'm just stressed about work." But her excuses never quite added up. Then came the girls' nights out that seemed to happen more and more frequently. She'd come home late, smelling of alcohol and sometimes cologne. When I questioned her, she'd snap at me, saying I was suffocating her and that she needed her space. I felt like I was going crazy, doubting myself at every turn. The day I found out the truth was like any other Tuesday. I had taken a half-day off work to surprise Sarah with lunch, thinking maybe we could reconnect. When I got home, I heard noises coming from our bedroom. My heart sank as I quietly made my way upstairs, praying I was wrong about what I was about to find. I pushed open the door, and there they were, my wife and my father, tangled up in our bed. The bed where our children were conceived. I felt like I was going to be sick. Sarah screamed and tried to cover herself, while my dad just sat there, looking smug. I couldn't believe it. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," Sarah yelled, "but come on. How much more cliché could this get?" I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. "How long?" I managed to choke out. My dad, finally having the decency to look ashamed, mumbled, 6 months? 6 fucking months. Half a year of lies, betrayal, and making a fool out of me. I stormed out of the house, ignoring Sarah's pleas to talk about this. I drove around aimlessly for hours, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. How could the 2 people I trusted most in the world do this to me? When I finally came home that night, Sarah was waiting for me. She'd sent the kids to a neighbor's house, probably to avoid scarring them for life with the shitstorm that was about to go down. As soon as I walked in, she launched into this big, tearful apology. "Jake, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened? For 6 months? Did you trip and fall on his dick repeatedly?" She flinched at my words but kept going. "Your dad and we connected in a way I've never experienced before. It's not just physical, Jake. We're in love." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "In love? He's my father, Sarah. He's married to my mother. How could you do this to our family?" Sarah's demeanor suddenly changed. Her tears dried up, and she got this defiant look in her eyes. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened. Tom makes me feel alive, Jake. When was the last time you made me feel that way?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to blame me for her affair with my own father. The audacity of this woman was unreal. "So it's my fault you decided to fuck my dad?" I spat out. "Nice try, Sarah. You don't get to pin this on me." The next few days were a blur of anger, pain, and disbelief. I kicked Sarah out of the house and told her to stay with her sister. I couldn't stand the sight of her, and I didn't want the kids to see us fighting. Speaking of the kids, how the hell was I supposed to explain this to them? I called my mom, Linda, and asked her to come over. I figured she deserved to hear this from me, not from Tom or through the grapevine. When she arrived, I sat her down and braced myself for one of the hardest conversations of my life. Mom, there's no easy way to say this, I started, my voice shaking. Dad's been having an affair. With Sarah? I watched as confusion, then shock, then utter devastation washed over her face. What? No, that can't be right. Tom would never. She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I told her everything, how long it had been going on, how I found out. She sat there, silent and shell-shocked. Then, to my surprise, she got angry. Not at Tom or Sarah, but at me. Why are you making up these lies about your father? She snapped. He loves me. He would never do this. You must have misunderstood something. I was floored. My own mother was accusing me of lying about this. It felt like the whole world had turned upside down. Just as I was trying to convince my mom that I wasn't making this up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. Your dad and I are coming over. We need to talk to you and Linda together. Great. Just fucking great. I showed the text to my mom, whose face went pale. They're coming here? Together, she whispered, the reality of the situation finally starting to sink in. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah and my dad standing there, looking like they were about to face a firing squad. Which, honestly, didn't seem like such a bad idea at that moment. As they walked in, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. Sarah was wearing one of my dad's jackets. It was like they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. We all gathered in the living room, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. My mom sat rigid on the couch, her eyes darting between Tom and Sarah. I stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, waiting for whatever bullshit they were about to spew. Tom cleared his throat. Linda, Jake, we have something to tell you. My dad's words hung in the air like a bad smell. I couldn't believe he had the audacity to act like this was some kind of announcement, as if we didn't already know. Save it that, I spat. We know you've been fucking my wife. What else is there to say? Sarah flinched at my words, but Tom just nodded solemnly. You're right, son. What we did was wrong. We never meant for this to happen, but what? My mom interjected, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. You never meant to repeatedly cheat on your wife of 37 years with your own daughter-in-law? How does that just happen, Tom? I'd never seen my mom like this before. She was always the calm one, the peacemaker. But now, she was unleashing decades of pent-up frustration. Sarah, ever the drama queen, decided this was her moment to shine. She stepped forward, clutching my dad's arm. We're in love, she declared, as if that explained everything. We didn't plan this, but our connection is undeniable. We want to be together. I saw red. You want to be together? Are you fucking kidding me? What about our kids, Sarah? What about your vows? What about basic human decency? That's when my dad dropped the real bombshell. We're moving to Florida, he said. We've already found a place. We're leaving next week. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into chaos. My mom burst into tears, alternating between sobbing and hurling insults at Tom. I was yelling at both Sarah and my dad, demanding to know how they could do this to us, to our families. Sarah, in her typical fashion, tried to play the victim. Jake, please understand. We never wanted to hurt anyone. But you can't help who you fall in love with. I laughed bitterly. Oh, cut the crap, Sarah. You had plenty of chances to not hurt anyone. Like, I don't know, not screwing my father in the first place. My dad, apparently deciding he was done with the wholly apologetic act, squared his shoulders. Son, I know you're angry, but Sarah and I are adults. We have the right to pursue our happiness. Your happiness? My mom screeched, throwing a decorative pillow at him. What about my happiness, Tom? What about our grandchildren? That's when Sarah dropped another bomb. Actually, she said, her hand moving to her stomach, Tom and I are going to have a baby of our own. The room went dead silent. I felt like I was going to be sick. My dad had knocked up my wife. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a whole new level of fucked up. I stared at Sarah, then at my dad, then back at Sarah. The realization hit me like a truck. How far along are you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, avoiding my eyes. About 10 weeks, she finally admitted. The math didn't add up. We hadn't had sex in over 3 months. This baby, it was definitely my dad's. You lied to me, I said, my voice rising with each word. You told me you were on birth control. You said you didn't want any more kids. Sarah had the audacity to look offended. I didn't lie about the birth control. It must have failed. Failed for him, but worked perfectly fine for me for the last 3 years? I shouted. Bullshit, Sarah. My mom, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood up. Without a word, she walked up to my dad and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the room. 37 years, she said, her voice eerily calm. 37 years I've put up with your selfish bullshit, Tom. But this is the last straw. She turned to Sarah, her eyes blazing. And you home-wrecking little tramp. I welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay us. Sarah started to cry, big crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks. Linda, please, we never meant for this to happen. Save it, my mom snapped. She turned to me. Jake, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you from the start. The next few hours were a blur of heated arguments, tears, and shocking revelations. It turned out that Sarah and my dad had been planning their escape to Florida for months. They'd been siphoning money from their respective accounts, looking at houses online, and even contacting lawyers about divorce proceedings. So, let me get this straight, I said, feeling numb. You two are just going to run off to Florida, have your love child, and what? Pretend the rest of us don't exist? Sarah had the gall to look offended. Of course not, Jake. We were going to tell you, eventually. We just needed time to figure things out. My mom, who had been quietly seething, suddenly stood up. I want you both out of this house. Now, my dad tried to reason with her. Linda, come on. We can discuss this like adults. Adults, she scoffed. Adults don't sneak around behind their families' backs. Adults don't destroy 2 marriages for a midlife crisis fling. As they were leaving, Sarah turned to me, her eyes pleading. Jake, what about the kids? When can I see them? I felt a surge of protective anger. You think I'm letting you anywhere near our children right now? After what you've done? Dream on, Sarah. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. As the door slammed behind them, I turned to my mom, expecting to see her break down. Instead, she had a look of steely determination in her eyes. Jake, she said, her voice steady. I think it's time we showed those two exactly what they're up against. My mom's words hung in the air, and I felt a mixture of confusion and curiosity. What do you mean, Mom? I asked, still trying to process everything that had just happened. She sat down on the couch, patting the spot next to her. As I joined her, she took a deep breath and said, Jake, there's something I've never told you about your father and me. Something I've kept secret for years to protect this family. My mind raced with possibilities. What else could possibly be added to this circus of a situation? Your father, she continued, her voice low, has a gambling problem. A big one. He's been in debt to some unsavory characters for years. I've been covering for him, using my inheritance to pay off his debts and keep our family afloat. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? How much are we talking about here, Mom? She looked me straight in the eye. Close to $500,000, Jake. I whistled low. Jesus Christ. Does Sarah know about this? My mom shook her head. I doubt it. Tom's always been good at hiding his vices from the people he's trying to impress. But here's the thing, Jake. I've been keeping meticulous records of every payment, every loan, every lie. I always hoped I'd never have to use them, but... A slow, almost predatory smile spread across her face. I think it's time we remind your father exactly what he's walking away from, and what he stands to lose. I stared at my mom in disbelief. This woman, who I'd always seen as gentle and accommodating, suddenly looked like a force to be reckoned with. It was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Mom, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I asked, a mix of awe and apprehension in my voice. She nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. I'm done being the dutiful wife who cleans up his messes. If Tom wants to throw away our marriage for a fling with your wife, then he'd better be prepared for the consequences. We spent the next few hours going through my mom's meticulously kept records. Bank statements, IOUs, threatening letters from loan sharks. It was all there. My dad's dirty laundry, neatly cataloged and dated. As we worked, my mom filled me in on more details. Apparently, my dad had been using his charm and connections in the sports world to place increasingly risky bets. He'd win big occasionally, which only fueled his addiction. But the losses, they were staggering. So what's the plan? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and excitement. Are we going to blackmail them? My mom shook her head. Not blackmail, Jake. We're going to give them a choice. They can either come clean about everything, the affair, the baby, the gambling debts, to the entire family and face the music, or what? I prompted. Or we'll do it for them, she said grimly. And trust me, our version won't be pretty. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. We need to talk about the kids. Can we meet tomorrow? I showed the message to my mom. She smiled that predatory smile again. Perfect, she said. Tell her to bring Tom. It's time for a family meeting. The next day, I was a bundle of nerves as I waited for Sarah and my dad to arrive. My mom, on the other hand, was the picture of calm. She dressed up in her best suit, hair perfectly styled, looking more like a CEO about to close a big deal than a scorned wife. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened it. Sarah and my dad stood there, looking uncomfortable. Sarah was still wearing my dad's jacket, which made my blood boil all over again. Come in, I said curtly, leading them to the living room where my mom was waiting. As soon as they entered, my mom took control of the situation. Sit down, she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. They complied, looking bewildered. Now, my mom began, her voice icy calm, you two seem to think you can just run off to Florida and start your new life together, leaving behind nothing but destruction. But here's what's going to happen instead. She pulled out a thick folder and slammed it on the coffee table. My dad's face went pale. Linda, he started, but she cut him off. Shut up, Tom. For once in your life, you're going to listen. She turned to Sarah. Did you know about this, Sarah? About Tom's gambling debts? About how he's been one step away from having his kneecaps broken by loan sharks. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. She turned to my dad. Tom, what is she talking about? My dad was sweating now. It's not what it sounds like, he stammered. Oh, it's exactly what it sounds like, my mom replied. And now, you two have a choice to make? The room fell silent as my mom laid out their options. Sarah and my dad sat there, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the reality of their situation sank in. Option 1, my mom said, her voice steady and businesslike. You both come clean to the entire family. Tom, you admit to your gambling addiction and the debts you've racked up. Sarah, you explain to your parents and our children exactly why you're leaving your husband for his father. You both face the consequences of your actions like adults. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Option 2, you try to run off to Florida like you planned. But if you choose that path, I'll make sure everyone knows every sordid detail. The affairs, the lies, the debts, everything. And Tom, I'm sure your sports buddies would be very interested to know about some of your more questionable bets. My dad's face went from pale to ashen. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, my mom replied, her eyes flashing. Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly burst out, this is blackmail. You can't do this. I couldn't hold back anymore. Oh, that's rich coming from you, Sarah. You fuck my dad, get pregnant, plan to abandon our kids, and you're worried about what's fair? Jake, please, she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. Think about the children. They need their mother. They need a mother who isn't a lying, cheating snake, I spat back. My mom held up her hand, silencing us both. You have 24 hours to decide, she said calmly. Choose wisely. As they left, looking shell-shocked, I turned to my mom in awe. That was incredible, I said. She smiled sadly. I just hope it works, Jake. For all our sakes. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the ticking clock. My mom, on the other hand, was a pillar of strength. She spent the time making calls to lawyers, financial advisors, and even a private investigator friend of hers. Always be prepared, she told me with a grim smile. As the deadline approached, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. We need to talk. In person. Bringing Tom. I showed the message to my mom, who nodded. Let's finish this, she said. They arrived looking haggard, like they hadn't slept either. Good, I thought bitterly. Let them suffer a fraction of what they've put us through. We all sat down in the living room, the tension palpable. My dad cleared his throat. We've made our decision, he said, his voice rough. Sarah nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. We're going to come clean, she said. To everyone. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was quickly tempered by my mom's next words. And the baby, she asked, her voice cold. Sarah flinched. I've decided to get an abortion, she whispered. It's not fair to bring a child into this mess. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. As much as I hated the idea of my wife having my father's baby, the thought of her aborting it made me feel sick. Jesus, Sarah, I breathed. Are you sure? She nodded, not meeting my eyes. It's for the best. My dad looked devastated. Linda, he pleaded, turning to my mom. Isn't there any way we can work this out? I'll get help for the gambling, I swear. My mom's face was impassive. You should have thought of that before you decided to sleep with our daughter-in-law, Tom. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I struggled to process everything that had just been said. My dad's plea, Sarah's decision about the baby, the realization that our lives would never be the same again, it was all too much. Finally, I broke the silence. So, what happens now? I asked, looking between all of them. My mom took charge once again. Now, we start damage control, she said firmly. Tom, you're going to check into a rehabilitation program for your gambling addiction. I've already made some calls. You'll leave tomorrow? My dad nodded meekly, looking defeated. Sarah, my mom continued, you'll move out of the house immediately. Jake, I assume you'll be filing for divorce? I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Yeah, I will. Sarah let out a choked sob. Jake, please, can't we try to work this out? For the kids. I felt a surge of anger. Work it out? Are you kidding me? You slept with my father, Sarah. You were ready to run off with him and leave our children behind. There's no working out after that. As for the children, my mom interjected, we'll need to figure out a custody arrangement. But for now, they'll stay with Jake. Sarah, you can have supervised visitation until we sort everything out legally. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but my dad put a hand on her arm, silencing her. And the family? I asked. When do we tell them? My mom's expression softened slightly. We'll have a family meeting this weekend. Everyone needs to know the truth, as painful as it may be. As Sarah and my dad prepared to leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't the end, far from it. But it was the beginning of something new. Something honest. The family meeting that weekend was every bit as excruciating as I'd imagined. We gathered everyone at my parents' house, my siblings, their spouses, Sarah's parents, and even a few close family friends. The kids were sent to my aunt's place for the day, shielded from the impending storm. As my mom laid out the whole sordid tale, the room cycled through shock, disbelief, anger, and disgust. Sarah's parents were horrified, her mother bursting into tears while her father looked like he wanted to strangle my dad. My sister, Emily, was livid. How could you do this to Jake? She screamed at Sarah. To all of us? We trusted you. Sarah, for her part, sat there silently, tears streaming down her face. My dad tried to speak up a few times, but each attempt was met with scathing glares that shut him up quickly. When my mom got to the part about the pregnancy and Sarah's decision to terminate, the room fell silent. It was my brother, Mike, who broke it. So, let me get this straight, he said, his voice dripping with disgust. You two are going to run off to Florida, have Dad's love child, and what? Pretend the rest of us don't exist? Start a new family like some Twisted Brady Bunch reboot? Sarah flinched at his words. It wasn't like that, she mumbled. Then what was it like? I found myself asking, surprised by the calmness in my voice. Because from where I'm standing it looks pretty damn clear. The meeting dragged on for hours, with questions, accusations, and painful revelations flying back and forth. By the end, everyone was emotionally exhausted. As people started to leave, my mom's friend Carol approached me. "Jake, honey," she said softly, "how are you holding up?" I managed a weak smile. "Ask me again in a year," I replied. The weeks following the family meeting were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and trying to explain the situation to our kids in a way that wouldn't scar them for life. It was like walking through a minefield, never knowing when the next explosion would hit. My dad checked into rehab as promised, leaving my mom to deal with the fallout of his gambling debts. She threw herself into untangling the financial mess with a determination that was both impressive and a little scary. Sarah moved in with her sister and started seeing a therapist. She tried to reach out to me several times, always with the same plea, "Can't we try to work things out?" Each time, I shut her down. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The divorce proceedings were ugly. Sarah fought for joint custody, claiming she'd made a mistake but was still a good mother. Her pregnancy termination became a point of contention, with her lawyer arguing it showed she was putting the family's needs first. My lawyer countered that it demonstrated a pattern of reckless decision-making. Through it all, my kids were my anchor. Telling them that mommy and daddy weren't going to be living together anymore was the hardest thing I've ever done. My daughter, Emma, 7, cried and asked if it was her fault. My son, Ethan, 5, just looked confused and kept asking when mommy was coming home. It broke my heart. One night, after finally getting the kids to sleep, I sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. That's when I got a text from an unknown number. "Jake, it's Tom. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the block button. "Against my better judgment," I replied. "What could you possibly have to say?" I waited anxiously for my dad's response, a mix of anger and curiosity churning in my gut. When my phone buzzed again, I almost dropped it in my haste to read the message. "I know I have no right to ask this, but please hear me out. I'm 3 weeks into rehab, and part of the program is making amends. I know a simple apology can't fix what I've done, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. For everything." I scoffed at the screen. "An apology? After everything he'd done?" I typed out a scathing reply but paused before sending it. Taking a deep breath, I decided to hear him out. "Go on," I texted back. His response came quickly, "I've ruined everything. Our family, your marriage, my relationship with you and your mother. I let my addictions control me, and I made the worst mistake of my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm committed to getting better, to being a better man. For you, for your mother, for the grandkids." I felt a lump forming in my throat. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted my dad back. But the pain was still too raw. "What about Sarah?" I asked, dreading the answer. There was a long pause before his reply came. "It's over. It was a mistake from the start. I'm focusing on my recovery and trying to salvage what's left of my marriage. If your mother will have me." I sat there, staring at the message, unsure how to feel. On one hand, I was relieved that he seemed to be taking responsibility. On the other, the damage was already done. Finally, I typed out a response. "I appreciate you reaching out, Dad. I can't forgive you right now, maybe not ever. But I'm glad you're getting help. For now, let's just focus on the kids. They need their grandfather, even if I'm not ready to have my father back yet." As I hit send, I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It's been a year since that text exchange with my dad, and I'm finally sitting down to write this post. I've been lurking on this subreddit for months, reading stories that made mine seem almost normal in comparison. But I think it's time to share my experience, in hopes that it might help someone else going through a similar hell. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. Sarah got supervised visitation with the kids, which has slowly expanded as she's proven herself capable of putting their needs first. It's not easy, but we're learning to co-parent civilly for Emma and Ethan's sake. My dad completed his rehab program and has been clean for 9 months now. He and my mom are in intensive couples therapy, trying to rebuild their relationship. It's a work in progress, but they're both committed to it. I've had a few one-on-one sessions with him, and while I can't say I've forgiven him entirely, we're slowly rebuilding some semblance of a relationship. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. I've started dating again, cautiously. Trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I'm working on it with my therapist. The kids are adjusting well, all things considered. They're resilient little buggers. Looking back, I can see now that there were signs I ignored, red flags I dismissed. If I could give any advice to someone suspecting infidelity, it would be this: trust your gut. Don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking you're crazy or paranoid. And remember, no matter how bad things seem, you can survive it. You're stronger than you know. To those of you in the thick of it right now, hang in there. It does get better. Not easier, necessarily, but better. You learn to carry the pain differently, to let it shape you without defining you. And to Sarah and Dad, if you ever stumble across this post, I hope you found the peace and clarity you were looking for. I hope it was worth it. As for me, I'm going to log off now and go play catch with my kids in the backyard. Life goes on, and I'm determined to make the most of it. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video, because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.